All right. I think we're about on time. So if we can sit down, that would be great. I feel like we've lost a few people. I'm hoping that they will still be coming in. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming back promptly. Let me check my notes. Just a reminder again of the housekeeping rules. Remember, if you're in Zoom, to use the Q&A to ask your questions online. Remember to include your name and organization and who the question is for. For the people in the room, also, it's always good to introduce yourself again. We will have the microphones again. I did hear that people didn't hear me very well, so I'm going to use the handheld microphone in the afternoon. But that means that when we have the panels, I'll probably be standing here because we don't have so many microphones. A reminder that the forum is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website, and to please use the hashtag EMB Forum. So, okay, without further ado, we'll continue on with our third session. This session is about coastal adaptation and livability at the land-sea interface. We will start off again with a keynote speech by Louis Celliers, who is from the Climate Services Center in Germany, and he's going to talk about how we can and should adapt. So Louis, and apparently I'm going to have to give him a 5-minute warning.
Thank you, Sheila. Also to the European Marine Board, your members, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks for exposing me to this very pleasant community. It's really fun to be here. When I saw the title, as is my way, I overthought the title, because originally it said, how can and how should we adapt? Now I'm thinking, what goes first? The normative, how we should be adapting, and then we adapt according to what we can, or is it the other way around? Anyway, maybe that was not intended in the title. Maybe the title was just to look at adaptation, and I'll be gladly talking about that. In an outline, something like this. So firstly, I have a classical ecological science background, and then I spent maybe 20 years trying to get away from thinking like a scientist. Which hopefully made me more approachable in terms of a human being, without offending any scientist, of course, but working more with society and trying to work in the interface between science and society. I work for the Climate Service Center Germany, which by nature tries to take scientific data and turn it into a service to be used by a user. So it could be a public sector user, it could be a company, whatever the case may be. The point is, however, it's the process of taking complicated scientific data and bringing it into use. So that aside, I remain a scientist. So I will frame this discussion. As much as I try not to, you will hear the scientist in me when I talk about the things relating to adaptation. So adaptation, the second point, adaptation, where, of what, and to what. I'll sneak in a quick slide about that. And then, because the title is so open, how do we adapt? If I had 2 days, I couldn't tell you that. If I had a week and we all contributed, we probably wouldn't be able to answer that. So I'll give you some universal wisdom for adaptation from the work that I have done together with many other people. And basically, I've got 8 slides. The universal wisdom would be 4 of them, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some cases that we've worked on, and we'll finish with Q&A maybe, or we keep the Q&A for the panel discussion. So firstly, coastal adaptation. Where, of what, and to what? It is a huge question. Just looking at the picture, you can see There could be adaptations to climate change in every single one of those sectors or activities. All of those relate to coastal communities. So it's not a question that we are trying to separate communities from sectors. Sectors, yes, they are by nature sectorial, but they also interact with communities. So there are communities on the coast. Sectors need to adapt, communities need to adapt, activities in this sphere is huge. So when we talk about adaptation, it covers a lot of ground. And also adaptation to what? Climate change adaptation is clear, but we also have to adapt to our degrading environment in general. So that's the context. It's a big, complicated, hairy topic. And whenever I talk about adaptation, I always preface it by saying, yes, we have to adapt, but adaptation follows mitigation. Mitigation is where we start. If we mitigate, we don't need to adapt, which is not entirely true. We will be adapting now because we've adjusted our climate, and we'll do so. We'll need to adapt for the next 100, 200 years, even if we could mitigate perfectly, which we can't. So, universal wisdom. The first part of the answer, or how do we adapt, is we look at context. Context matters. So, and in this example that you see on the board, this is knowledge about adaptation in different parts of the world. So we know more about adaptation in some parts of the world, the darker part, which would be Europe, North America, Australia. So in terms of coastal adaptation, we know a lot about coastal adaptation in some places. In other places, we don't. We know less about how to adapt. The graph, the pie chart shows, in terms of context, we know more about some parts of adaptation than other parts of adaptation. So most of the scientific knowledge we generate about adaptation is in the first part of the adaptation cycle. That's more about scientific assessments, understanding how things will change, etc., etc. But we know very little about implementation and about monitoring and evaluation. There's different contexts as well. So working in, for example, Western Indian Ocean, or working in the Baltic Sea, or even if you work in the Baltic Sea, working in Latvia and Denmark, trying to increase the degrees of adaptation, is hugely different between those two countries. And I'll speak about those differences. Hopefully I have time to speak about those differences. The second universal wisdom is we have to accelerate. So don't try and read the gray. It's just my attempt to say that there are so many negative or downward trends in biodiversity, in upward trends in temperature, loss of coral reefs, loss of sandy beaches. You heard it this morning from David as well. So IBES basically says we can take so many of these trends, and they're all going down or up, depends on what is negative for that particular for that particular topic. The point is, if the rate and extent of the corrective actions, so our response to those trends, don't exceed those rates, then we are falling behind. Okay, so we know that there's a lot of things going wrong. And for us to fix them, we have to be faster. We have to be more assertive. We need to accelerate. We need to speed up. So in terms of adaptation, we kind of know where we're going in terms of climate. We have estimates, for example, of sea level rise. But we also know that even sea level rise is speeding up now. And the question is, are the responses keeping up with that rate of decay? The third universal wisdom is something to do with DIKW, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So forget about the complicated graph. Look at the blue one on your left. Most of you will know that data, when interpreted, becomes information. information when used becomes knowledge, and knowledge applies is wisdom. It's a very intuitive scheme. It's very old as well. It's been used it's been used since the 70s. It also happens to be not very true when we look at how we want to adapt in local communities, because the mere fact that data exists and can become information does not guarantee that it will become knowledge and become wisdom. It just doesn't happen like that. You need an inversion, and we suggest this type of inversion. So yes, data is important, of course, but equally important on the other side, when we want to take data into decision-making, we need things like understanding politics. We need political will. We need to break down bureaucracy. We need leadership. We need power. So those two are both very important. And if you take into account that we need to understand governance, we need to understand the usability of science, we need to have simple access, and put all of those together, eventually we can take data through this process to become wisdom. And wisdom is better decision making. The final universal wisdom is actually a combination of quite a lot. And for coastal adaptation, we certainly need some social innovation. And social innovation is just any action by individuals or organizations and networks to generate novel solutions. So this is a scheme that shows where some of the social innovations can come from. We can have social innovation in governance. We can have social innovation in terms of how we anticipate the future, how we deal with the future, how we think about the future. There's social innovation locked up in engagement. So how do we engage in terms of coastal adaptation? How do we engage between people, between organizations, between the government? There are innovation in communication. There are ways to compel. We can use moral suasion and peer pressure. All of those are tools in a toolbox of social innovation that can help us move towards higher degrees of coastal adaptation. Now, just that we've seen those four things, let me talk to you a little bit about one of our projects in which we try to look at those universal wisdoms. And this is an Interreg project. So if you know Interreg, you know that it is 5 minutes. Interreg is by nature more focused on decision making, on having an impact on the ground. And this is a project that deals with climate smart beaches for sustainable coastal tourism. So there's a heavy load of adaptation in there for the municipalities to start looking at how their coastal tourism will look like in the future. Because we all know by now, if you don't know, that the Baltic is the new Mediterranean. So people are moving, that's a serious byline that's being used in the Interreg domain. The Baltic is the new Mediterranean. So in this project, we found out that all of those universal wisdoms are really hard to implement. It is really, really hard to work with coastal adaptation or to try and increase the degree of coastal adaptation at the local scale, because this is what this project is about. We're focusing on the local municipality, the municipality that's heavily engaged in coastal tourism and beach management, to try and get across to them that the tourism they have now, the infrastructure they've developed now, may not be appropriate, not even 10 years from today. And we found out that even in Europe, climate adaptation and even climate change recognized as a key driver of a change in future conditions is not universally understood. And it took us a really, really long time to engage with people in the municipality, because that is what it came down to. We had nothing else but personal contact with municipal officials, with the municipal manager, with communities, with businesses. So I will not go into the detail of the project, but we had intensive engagement and different types of engagement and different processes from mapping to visioning to community-based risk and vulnerability assessment to planning adaptation pathways. All of this in a community of people that initially, when we started having the discussion, and that's Rimans. He's the guy that's responsible for coastal tourism, and now also for climate change adaptation. And initially he said, "No, come on, climate change is not real." His boss, the municipal manager, is an active climate change denier. But it took 2 years of conversation, and to the point now where he's leading the conversation. We don't meet with the community itself from the front, but he's doing it. And he's very, very open about about climate change, about the threat that they are facing. He's very clear on the data that's needed, on the impact of both extreme events and slow onset impacts. And if I could say a final word about this place in Latvia, is that it's not complete success, but in terms of how to do adaptation, this is telling us it's a slow, conscious process of engaging with people. And then finally, I'm just throwing this in there because it's at a different scale. Of course, there's lots and lots of guidance on how to adapt on the coast. And this is just one example, which you can maybe ask me about afterwards. This is a product that is about to be launched, which is guidance for coastal adaptation, specifically for least developed countries. It's one of the UNFCCC supplementary guidance documents. And you're not supposed to be reading it. It's complicated. It follows process. And so there's lots of guidance for coastal adaptation when you really want to answer the question how to adapt. So there's a lot out there, but ultimately you have to always revert back to the fundamental wisdom. All of the sources for this talk would be in the presentation itself. Everything comes from published work. And I would like to wrap up, Sheila, by saying that when it comes to coastal adaptation, even as a scientist and trying to establish or to work towards high degrees of coastal adaptation, the point is always engaging with people. So I think that's where I left science a little bit behind and focusing on the softer side of humanity, is trying to engage with people and build trust and move towards embedding our science into society. Thank you very much.
I'm going to give you a chance for questions. Please hold your questions for the panel discussion afterwards. I think we will just go to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Louis. That was very interesting. And he will be very well followed by Hannelore Malfout, who is a policy advisor and program coordinator at the province of West Flanders here in Belgium. They actually manage a series of recreational sites on the coast and engage with the public on topics around the land-sea interface. So it's a very good follow on there. And she will speak about her experiences in how do we engage the public. So it's as if we actually planned it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. I was today here already listening, and with every topic I thought, that's an interesting link to make. I can refer to that. So I have lots of things to inspire. I work for the province of West Flanders. We are a regional governance. We are coastal based. The office have almost a view on the coast, so I see our coast every day. And I work a lot with coastal communities. And when the Marine Board asked me, do you want to speak about your work about coastal communities? the thing is, yeah, what defines a coastal community? What makes a coastal community so unique? So what we always start is, if we look back, how does this coast has been formed? It's actually the community that's been formed by the way that the sea moves. Actually, it's a region that has learned to live with the sea. It's already from ancient times, you see how people adapt to this changing coastline. We see changes on land, but if you look now during the last years, we also see changes on the seascape. So it's really the combination of between land and sea. And what does it mean to be a coastal community? If you look at the effects of the sea on this land, this is a digital elevation model. You see the blue is actually the floodplains. It's managed land. It's managed land where the influence of the sea comes. Where do we see the effect of the sea on these coastal communities? It's on the water management. It's the management of the water system. It's based with the groundwater level. It's based with salinization. It's a risk that is there when we think about these coastal communities. We know salinization in the future with climate change and with the sea level rise, it will only be higher. It's a factor 2. That's actually the risk of being salinizated. But we see it also in the population. We, the Belgian coast, I work for the Belgian coast, it's a very gray population. We recently brought out a study together with our research institute on what makes this coast unique based on a series of indicators, numbers, figures, facts. And what is really breathtaking almost is how gray our coast is. It's more than 30% of the people who live there are above 65 years. It's more than 1 on 10 who's above 80%. This is big social impacts. So this is a coastal area. People go there, people move there, and it has an effect on the demographic of the coast. We're not the only coast who has this effect. We know that the Mediterranean, we know the south of France is also seeing the same demographical change. Coastal community is also linked with the complex governance. It's also mentioned here today. It's the place where all government layers comes together. Belgium is a complex land, but we see it especially at this coast. We have, of course, EU legislation that comes. We have federal legislation. We have Flemish legislation. We have a province who is also working there, and we have municipalities. And if you look at all those competences, they're all linked. So try to make a change there. You know, you have to work in a multi-level governance. You have to work together. You have to have respect to everybody who working there and bring together all competences and make sure that you have a clear vision where you want to go to make this change in a complex governmental system. What does it mean to be a coastal community? It means that we are on the forefront of climate change. We know the sea level will rise, and we know it's rising already for a long time. We have 21 centimeters gained of sea during the last 50 years. It's the numbers aren't that good. It's still going up. And do the people who live there are aware of this climate change? We had a study conducted, a survey conducted in the Blue Balance project. Yes, people are aware. They are aware that the place that they are living now, that they don't gonna be, that there is a risk that it's not gonna be that good to live there in the long term. People are aware that there is a change that comes towards their area where they live. And the sea will still rise. We know we're gonna, prediction says by 2180 centimeters, but we saw the last figures for the last years. It doesn't look that good. We're not being able to change those figures. So it's gonna still rise. How far will it rise? How far will we have to adapt? So something to be aware of as a coastal community. Of course, we are human. We try to adapt. We try to plan for the long time future. We see a safety scan for our Belgian coast. This has been done by the Flemish government in a process that is called kustvisie. They take a safety scan of the Belgian coast and they say what happens when we have 1 meter sea level rise, 2 meters sea level rise, 3 meters sea level rise, and you see the change in the color. You see which areas becomes more and more in danger, more and more unsafe. So it's actually time to act. We have a coastal vision. It's a process where we start working, okay, how can we predict our coast in this long term? How can we protect our coast for this 3 meters sea level rise? Very good plan, very nice build up, a lot of attention to nature-based solutions. We have to think about how we include the nature in the story. We have a very build-up coast. We neglected our ecological processes. How can we restore them again? But then you have the question, how do you bring this story to our local communities? We know it's going to take still some time for this whole process to be touched upon these local communities. So what we try to do is really to bring back this story of sea level rise to the local communities. We say we try to think in a very broad way, but we make it workable, manageable on a small scale. How can we start already with demonstrating projects, with trying to change the way that people maintenance the beaches on this long-term perspective to make the change already there? We use a lot of scientific data and observation because we think that there's a truth there, there's a certainty there. You can use it, it's objective, and you can use it. We try to work participative. We ask the coastal communities, what do you like about this place? Where do you want to have it changed? Short term, what do you like? What don't you like? And if you can dream, what do you dream about? Where do you want this coast to be in the future? We try to visualize it, really breaking down all these elements so it's manageable for local communities to sort work with it. And we see it works. That's what I wanted to say. We have actually, one of the examples is we have a coastal community. They build a new sea dike. It was built without any protest against the legislation. So if you start really talking with your local communities and start to showing them where you come from and where you need to go, they understand. So that's something I really want to put the attention on. You see the acceptance actually for this, also for these nature-based solutions. You see also the difference between residents and tourists. There's still some work that needs to be done there because residents, they feel a certain ownership for the place that they live. They love it, they want to act for it, and they know that something needs to be done. But we still see when we ask to tourists, there's some work that still needs to be done there also. Because what it does mean to be a coastal community, you see the direct effects. You see direct effects of tourism. You see what is happening to the health of our North Sea. Litter is one of those examples. We know how much litter there is, can be found on our beaches. We know it's a lot. We know a lot of it is plastics, and we know also it comes locally, it stays in the estuaries. So it's something we can actually manage. Do we feel responsible about it? People who live there, yes, they do feel responsible about it. They want to do something. Tourists, not so much. So what we try to do with the office is we try to work on this citizens' awareness. We support communication actions on all different on this topic of litter. We work together with local initiatives to bring out the story of litter and pollution. We also try to work on topics that's not so easily communicated about, like biodiversity. How can you bring a story of biodiversity to a tourist? We try to do it by organizing coastal safaris. During the summer months, we don't have the big five, but we have other interesting species. So during the summer months, we organize tours for people to see our local big five. We do have also interesting species who are European protected, and we go off the beaten track and we see what's there at this coastal community. We also work on citizen engagement. We have we are supporting an educational initiative that's called Expedition Coastline. It's really working on ocean literacy. It's about schools at the coast. I often say my kids go to a school at the coast. They don't go on sea classes. They go to the Ardennes, to the forest. So we have to bring the coast also into the schools. We were doing a guidance for a thesis. There are people who living in Belgium who are 20, 22 years old, who never been at the coast, who never seen the sea. I found it remarkable. So we have to bring the passion for the coast, for the sea also within the classes, starting young and building up. So we're very happy that finally we're getting there with this Expedition Coastline. We're supporting schools, we're supporting these educational partners, and we are very proud that we're finally going to have the first blue schools in Belgium. Yay! So we're getting there. Oof. We also try via our provincial visitor centers, try to bring the story of the coast. Every year, a lot of tourists come to visit the coast, and via these visitor centers, we try to bring a different element of coastal community, of coastal management through these tourists. But we're not the only coastal region. Of course, it's also important that we look broader. I work also for a marine resources group within the North Sea Commission, and what you there see is actually all along this North Sea or all along these sea basins, we all have the same problems. We're all tackling the same challenges, so it's very interesting also to learn from each other. You don't have to invent the wheel again, but you have to listen and you have to try to share best practices and share knowledge. Because yeah, what does it mean to be a coastal community? It's in our DNA, it's emotion. You see it when you look at art, the sea is there, and that's something that needs to stay.
Thank you, Hannelore. Okay, so now, if I'm not mistaken, we will go to our panel discussion. So you can take a seat, and Louis, if you can come back. We also have 2 more panelists, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, indeed. We have Soetken Vervulst, who is from the Free University of Brussels in Belgium. And she's a landscape archaeologist who is coordinating a project called Testrep, which you will tell us more about. And Richard Cronin, who is the marine advisor for the Department of Housing, Planning and Community and Local Government in Ireland. And I think, do we have slides? Oh, I actually have to click on Soetken. Maybe we'll start with that, Soetken. So I think she's got some slides. So if you could, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you can stay there. I think you need to switch it on.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just got 3 slides to give you an idea about Testrep. If you can straight away move on to the next one. So it's an interdisciplinary research project in which we're looking at the central part of the Belgian coastline, studying its evolution over the past 5,000 years. And we specifically chose this study area, better, because there's an intriguing historic narrative to tie it into, namely that we used to have an island there called Testrep. If you can, sorry. Which was part of this coast because at the time, and now we're going back in time a couple of 1,000 years, our coast was still a far more natural landscape, a tidal environment. So you had these big tidal gullies, and one of them happened to run more or less parallel to the present day coastline, thereby delineating this long island shape. And in the Middle Ages, this place was known as Testrep, and you had communities that came to live there that developed settlements called Westende on the western end, Middelkerke Church in the middle, and then Oostende, the settlement on the eastern end of this island. This island is no longer there, and we've researched why that is, what happened. So the big tidal gully itself became part of the polder landscape, and then we lost a part of the seaward side of this island. One of our research questions being, how much did we lose? When did we lose it? Why did we lose it? And to answer that, so we're doing interdisciplinary research. We're working together with a group of archaeologists like myself, marine scientists like Ruud, who is sitting over there from Flanders Marine Institute doing research at sea. We're also working together with coastal engineers from KU Leuven, there we go, who are helping us to model this coastal evolution. So we're giving them our landscape reconstructions from the past, and we're asking them to then model how we can go from point A to point B, what the driving forces might have been that have caused landscape change. And then to make all of that palpable and more understandable for a general audience, we're also working together with computer game designers who are creating visualizations of this landscape change. So that's one part of the project, the research. The type of funding we have also requires us to generate some kind of societal impact, and we're trying to do that on different levels. One, by getting our knowledge to maybe inspire coastal management, sustainable policies for the future, to try and improve heritage management on the coast and linking that to tourism, and to raise more public awareness about the natural dynamics that have shaped our coast for centuries. And for that, we're working together with a large group of stakeholders that should appear if you give that one more click. There we go. So people from policy, from industry, from the culture sector.
All right. Thank you very much. And then Richard, maybe you want to also give a quick introduction. I will.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Richard Cronin, and our department has changed names many times. I think we're now housing, local government and heritage, which is where we keep nature and biodiversity and water. But we're also moving to the Department of Environment, which is where we keep wind farms and energy. So I work for the Irish government. That's all you need to know. So I lead a very small team of people who are much smarter than me, and we work on, we implement the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in Ireland. We also deal with global and macro-regional marine environment issues. We work with our colleagues who implement the Water Framework Directive and marine spatial planning as well. So we do things at a community level, so at a coastal community level, right up to the United Nations, and we try and make it a set of Russian dolls so that what happens at a local level has an impact at a global level, but also the decisions made at a global level work at a local level as well. So that's what we generally try and achieve, and we do it for society because we work for the government. That's it.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I think we'll use the same method as we used this morning, except I'm going to be standing here just because the microphones might be better. Just a reminder that you guys have the handout. People online, please remember to use the Q&A and put your name in and so forth, and we will ask some questions in the room, but I will start quickly. Maybe I'll start with you, Richard, because yeah, I think you just introduced yourself, and we heard this morning about the European Ocean Pact, and you know, from what we understand from that, it should be giving us clarity on how we can integrate the different ocean policies. So the question is, do you think that marine spatial planning, the Marine Spatial Planning Directive, the MSFD, and the Water Framework Directive should be adapted, and if so, how?
Okay, so firstly on the EU Ocean Pact, I saw something on social media where someone said it was like the Loch Ness Monster. We're all looking for it, but none of us know what it looks like, and we all hope it's going to be there. But I think it's a really good opportunity because it gives us this opportunity to consolidate and take stock of all our policies. If I look at this College of Commissioners, they want to simplify things, they want to make Europe more competitive, and they want to deal with security and defence. So however we look at it, that's what it's going to be framed as. So as policymakers, we know that that's the European mandate for the next 5 years. So if I look at those three directives and I consider them, what we're going to need to do to make Europe more competitive and simplify things, we're going to need to make those directives implementable. So if I look at them, I would say marine spatial planning needs to happen at sea basin level, and not at national level. While planning is a national competency, we can see that if everybody wants to deploy offshore renewable energy, you suddenly realize within a matter of minutes that you're going to exceed ecosystem carrying capacity. So we're going to need to have them all implemented at the same scale. So the river basins and the marine regions of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive will probably need to come through to the Marine Spatial Planning Directive. When it comes to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, we've a lot of fantastic process around science and assessment, which we cannot lose, I don't think, as a member state official, but also as someone who works with the European Commission. This has given us the information base we need to make good decisions. But the environmental targets we're setting and the threshold values we're agreeing, they're not really binding. So how do we allow an economic actor or a national regulator, how do we get them to implement them to the Spatial Planning Directive? So the relationship between the Spatial Planning Directive, the Marine Spatial Planning Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive needs to be made more integrated, and through this concept of more binding environmental targets at the right spatial scale, so at sea basin or sub-basin level, so North Sea or Celtic Seas or the Western Mediterranean or so on and so forth. So that's what we need to do on that, okay? And then threshold values as well have to be understandable. And then we have a mechanism for ensuring that human activity is regulated properly and regulated fairly, so that if you're deploying technology or you're carrying an activity from member state to member state, it's a level playing field, which is what the European Union is about. When it comes to the Water Framework Directive, we have, source inputs, and we also have, with the Ocean Pact, the important thing to remember is the water resilience strategy that will come from DG Environment, and that's a source to sea strategy. So those two strategies should give us strong signposts to call for an integration of these. And it's to use the environmental assessments we have got already to help us to allow human activity to be carried out within the ecosystem carrying capacity, however that is done. But that's the fundamental issue we have. We heard it this morning. We're exceeding the carrying capacity when we all do too much within it. So we need to work out how to use technology to bring our activities back within the carrying capacity of the ecosystem to allow it to recover and provide the next generation with services. Thanks.
Thank you. And maybe I will come down the line here and I'll ask you, Sukan, so you work a little bit in the past, right? But why do you think policymakers today, the people that Richard is talking about, and the public today, why do you think they must understand what happened in the past? How do you think this links, the work that you're doing would inform the work that Richard is doing, for instance?
I think it can be informative on two main levels. One of it is really the research, the new knowledge that we're developing that is giving us insights really into these very long-term processes that are shaping our coastlines, the natural dynamics that are at play and that work over much longer timescales than policy does, but that are important to understand to make sure that the measures that we're implementing work with these natural dynamics as much as we can to make them as efficient as we can. So there's much knowledge to be gained by using the past as a really long-term evidence base to see what might be good strategies for different parts of the coastline. And so there's really an enormous amount of data that we can harness there from the past and really use that to implement better measures now, or more sustainable strategies. So there's that part. And then I think the other main contribution that can come is, again, through awareness raising, by telling these stories from the past and making those engaging. It can really help, I think, transform just numbers that can be very abstract for people when we're talking, for example, when Hannelore showed the sea level rise and how many centimeters it is now. That perhaps makes more sense to people if you can, for example, say, okay, let's look back 10,000 years ago. We were at the end of the last ice age, when people could still just walk across to England from European mainland, sea levels 130 meters lower than today. And then we have climate change, and all of a sudden the North Sea forms, and sea level rise is really at a high. And at that time, sea level rise was at 70 centimeters per century. And then we see that now we're looking at 2100, seeing that it's 84 centimeters per century. So that kind of perspective. Also looking at how people have lived in these landscapes in the past, and really create that sense of place, that connection to the past by, for example, also showing what remnants we still find in the landscape, or by showing material culture from people that used to live there. And try and create more of an understanding of how choices that we've made in the past have also influenced the situation we're in today.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Hannelore, I'll come following on from that. Suke was mentioning again the climate change, and from what I understand from your presentation, do you think that the coastal residents actually really understand the impact of climate change better than tourists in general? Is that what you've found? And
Yes.
how do we make that difference? How do we get them to, how do we, influence tourists to understand the impacts?
That's a difficult one because tourists, it's like waves, it comes and it goes. They don't, as you say, they don't have that much strong attachment to the place. You see it when you have like tourists who are with family houses who have a long-term tradition of coming to the same place, then you see that they're starting to identify with them, and then you have a base to work on. But if you're talking about the one-day tourist who comes to go to the beach, that's the biggest problem of litter also. So even we need to start there before we can talk about something such important as climate change. But I do see that residents really are very aware of what's happening in their area, and they look every day to the sea and they see the changes, and they are quite aware that something needs to be happened, and they are more open to, measures needs to be taken. We have to think on a very subtle way on how we're going to deal with these changes. So it's I think there's indeed a very big difference between those two groups.
And then maybe I'll come to you, Louis, to say, I mean, you mentioned that it's important to consider the whole system. So you have to consider the whole socio-ecological system in order to be able to deal with the adaptation. So why do you think that is?
Well, continuing the conversation, looking at the past, humanity throughout its development has always been closely connected to nature. So we developed in very close collaboration and ordered collaboration as part of nature. So that's kind of where we come from in the climate stability of the Holocene. So that is what, as a developing species, we know best. At some stage, however, we thought it wise that we separate ourselves from the understanding of what nature can offer. So to answer the question is, especially in the Anthropocene, where we also have a planet which is now not entirely as benign as it was in the Holocene. Seeing ourselves as embedded in an ecological system gives us a buffering capacity against climate change. And if we understand that, and if we can get back to the point where our socio-ecological systems are well functioning, we have this capacity to buffer against at least some of the impacts of climate change. There are limits, but at least we can buy ourselves some time if we use solutions like nature-based solutions, for example. So understanding the socio-ecological system in that sense gives us options. It gives us more options and this capacity to buffer against impact.
Yeah, and maybe I'll have a follow-on question from that. Actually, mentioning the tourism or tourists. I guess the point is that they don't see themselves as part of the same socio-ecological system, right? I think, how do we make them understand, tourists, that they are actually part of that system? I mean, if anybody has an idea, it would be nice, because I think that precisely, if we think of the coastal system as the humans and the environment, the people who live there completely understand that, but the people who come in as tourists, they don't understand it. So how do we make them aware of the impact that they have as part of that? How do we make them aware that they're actually part of that system in the first place?
That is, so sure, tourists are short-term and will always be, there will always be issues with creating understanding and sensitivity to the environment. The problem also extends to new incoming people or communities on the coast, because it's such a popular resource-rich place to be. There's not only tourists, it's also new residents and people that have not grown up on the coast. So there is, and it's so glib to say there's an awareness problem, it's an education problem, but that is the reality. So some of it we can address through education. Some of it is some of the issues can be addressed simply by starting at school level and at looking at curricula and exposing kids to how nature works on the coast, and building at least building that understanding. But then how you broaden that to incoming community and to short-term visitors, that's a massive awareness problem. And I mean, I don't have easy solutions, but at some stage you have to think about monitoring and evaluation. You have to look at enforcement. You have to also drive some good behavior in incoming, even in tourists. I mean, they're there for relaxation, but they should not basically detract from functioning of the system.
Yeah.
So that's the best answer I can come up with on short notice.
If anybody else has an answer, because I've gone off script here, I've asked questions they didn't know were coming.
It's within tourism. Now we have also this whole the idea of sustainable tourism, and that the tourism bring something better to the place that they visit. They actually leave a footprint, but not a negative footprint, but a positive footprint. We're not there yet, but that's a principle that now our office who works on tourism is really trying to enforce. They call it the pathway to tomorrow for tourism, and they really try to think what can a tourist, when he visits, brings, and make sure that when he leaves the place better. So I think that's where the ideas, the concepts, where you have to start thinking about when you think about the impact that tourists can have on the coastline.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Sutken first. Maybe if you have, I mean, do you think that, I know that you have an exhibition, which I saw actually in Ostend, awesome. If anybody's going to Ostend, awesome exhibition. Do you think that really helps? Do you think that this type of exhibition would really help people understand, tourists understand how the coast has changed? Or
I think that's one of the hopes, at least. We're just trying indeed in different ways to get this message across. And then again, storytelling can be helpful in that respect. Just getting people interested by saying, oh, do you know, there used to be an island in the coast and it disappeared. What might have happened? And then sneak the
sneak the science in.
We need to start maybe redeveloping this coast in a more sustainable way, because we've really veered away from that over the past centuries. Again, one of the things that springs to mind now, one of the stories that we tell also within the exhibit, because it is based in Ostend, we tell the story about Ostend, because what is Ostend nowadays is the second stage version of the city, and you used to have a medieval version of Ostend that got wiped away during a major storm. And so we have visuals depicting this storm, and then as people come out of this room into the next one, we ask them the question, now, if you were faced with a disaster like this, what would your reaction be? What would you do? Would you still want to stay in this place knowing that it is an inherently dangerous place to live? Or would you move away and find a safer spot? And there what we've noticed is basically it seems to be that the people who are already living on the coast tend to want to stay, even knowing that it is inherently also not the safest place to be. But indeed, there's more of a sense of we can make this work somehow. So I can relate to that. That definitely there's then a difference with tourists, and there's some kind of a mentality change maybe, and some more awareness raising that needs to happen.
Did you want to say something, Richard?
You put me on the stage and give me a microphone. I'm going to have an opinion on this. So the first thing I would say is that when we look at coastal communities and tourism, we may sometimes be creating a false division. Okay, so what they all have in common is that they all have an interest enough in the coastal environment and the marine environment to either want to live there or want to visit and use it for their recreation. So I think we have a lot there, you know, we must be careful about what that division is. And there's many types of tourists, you know. There are tourists who participate in activity on the beach, or on the sea, and in the coastal zone. So, you know, we have to maybe consider that before we consider is one a problem and one not. When it comes to points then around, you know, how can you maybe manage the impact of tourism if it is having an impact? You know, it's the first thing obviously is education, without a doubt. Now, maybe one thing we could do more of is, you know, this transfer of ownership and stewardship to those who are at the coast. So we have an example in Ireland where we started, it was about 15 years ago, where we had a lot of people who wanted to clean the beaches. Okay, so we funded an environmental body who now has about 18,000 groups who visit, and they gather together in their own time to clean the coast. But we, you know, that kind of only has a finite amount of participation and interest. So we've now broadened that out, and we now allow them to do biodiversity things as well on the coast. And then to complement that, we funded, because, you know, government can only do so much, but what we did is we funded a green schools module or an eco schools module on the marine environment. So we now are bringing people in at a primary school level, at high school level, and at university level, so that you're changing the attitudes and values in society at the point where it has the most effect. So when those people become, you know, functioning workforce people, or they want to visit the coast, their value system and their appreciation has changed from the very start, because they had a different education to the people who went before them. So there are many tools you can use to maybe address this, but I would say education before regulation would be your first step. Thanks.
I like that, education before regulation. Louis, did you want to come back? You put your hand up earlier. Don't know if you.
I should have had a better response, because we are just about to start a project on regenerative tourism in the Baltic. So I think just to add to everything that was said, and also linking it to David and transformation, the tourism industry itself can transform itself to be that regenerative. So the entire value chain of tourism can be switched around. It can be sustainable. It can everything from procurement to activities to the carbon cost itself. Everything can be addressed in a way that makes it regenerative. So there's also that aspect that can resolve some of the challenges.
Okay. Is there any questions in the room? We have one online. So can we get the microphone? Sorry. We'll get our steps in today, that's for sure.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question which I think some of you touched on, but it's been asked online by Samantha Pellarini. And she specifically asked about artistic involvement in developing narratives for climate adaptation, but I guess for broader discussions as well. Perhaps you can talk more about kind of how that could work as well, because it is quite a specific approach.
Was it artistic?
Artistic.
I didn't hear it well, so yeah. Anna-Laura?
Yeah, I think it's quite important indeed, because it's touching on what drives a society. I think having artists in and having the imagination, and it helps really for the storytelling. This morning we discussed a lot what can influence policy, And I think artistic impression and bringing artists in really can help to break down a story and to have an impact and to make sure that scientific, if you make the link between artists and scientific research, I think that has a very strong impact and it can help to bring a story and to persuade people to take action. So for me, it's a yes.
Yeah, I think definitely. One of the things we also did within the TASREP project is collaborate with a theater group who created a musical play, actually, called The Drowned Ballads of TASREP. And so it was telling this story about one of those big medieval storms hitting the coast and wiping away Ostend and wiping away other villages as well. And so the actors were portraying medieval people living in those towns, but in fact we're just holding up a mirror to our present day stance against what is happening and climate change and how people react to it. You had a child that was worried, you had a mother trying to calm the child, you had someone thinking, was a merchant thinking more from an economic perspective. This might open up some new opportunities for me. You had one person who was just like a hard laborer who said, oh, I'll just continue on what I've been doing all the while, it'll be fine if we just continue. And then you had the fool who was laughingly saying, oh, but there's a big storm coming, and when this storm comes, we can't just stay fixed in one place. We'll have to move along with the storm, and we'll have to adapt more. So that was again a different way to kind of convey the same message, but maybe in a more emotional sense, a way that people can easily relate to and recognize themselves in parts of this story, and to again inspire some reflection on it. So definitely.
Thanks. Juan and Torsten and Adrian.
Thank you. So Juan Ronco, former commission official working on maritime or marine spatial planning, and now a student in international politics at the KU Leuven here in Belgium. Now, I wanted to comment on what Richard said about this distinction between coastal communities and non-coastal communities. I fully agree with you. I think we shouldn't draw a hard line between the two. People living in and far from the coast can do good things and can do bad things for the coast. So, for instance, they pay taxes, which can be used then to do good things on the coast, but they can also do very bad things. So that's that I wanted to say this. Also, paradoxically, the farther you live from the coast, perhaps the more you have to say on what happens far from the coast. For instance, in marine spatial planning, that's something. But what happens close to the coast, I think that the people living on the coast are the best place to decide or to see what happens, because that affects them directly. So that's also a point I wanted to make. Now, on this issue of being affected directly, what happens on close to the coast, to the sea, and this is to Anne-Laure and Sutkin. I don't know whether you know this. There was an exercise done in 2012, 2014 to see how the Belgian coast could look like in 2100. I think in Dutch this was called Metropolitan Kustlandschap 2100. And there were, so this was a woman, Charlotte Geldof, I think, who worked on this.
She's in the room.
She's here? Okay, hi. Because I have been following this, I mean, not following, but studying this in detail, because I found this a very, sorry for the audience to, to elaborate on this. I found this a very, I went even to talk to the Flemish, what do you call it, architect, chief architect, who is a kind of guy providing advice on urban planning and in Flanders. So the thing is, there were 4 scenarios, and some of them were consistent in let the nature do what nature would like to do. For instance, flood parts of the Belgian coast, which would be coming back to what happened, how the coast was in 1200, 1300. So, because if you try to fight against nature, it's very hard, and then you have to pay. And I think the budget to protect the coast runs in the tens of millions a year. So what's your view on this? Is there a need of political courage to try to have some other solutions that would look like, for instance, flooding parts of the coast? Or okay, that's my question to you.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that, or no? He's already said it. Okay, perfect. All right.
I think indeed it's what price do you want to pay as society to protect an area? That's the question that needs to be raised. How much do you want to spend money on protecting a certain area, and how long can you hold it? And when do you start thinking, this isn't possible anymore? In Belgium, we're kind of lucky. We only have a short coast, but I know in France, they did the exercise after Storm Katrina. They looked very to the whole area that's been flooded, and they start realizing, we can't protect this on a very long scale. So we have to do a managed retreat. Where do we put our next critical infrastructure? Where going to be we plant our next hospital? We know it's going to be there for the next 30 years. Which areas we're going to enforce? Which areas we say, it's nice to live there, you can live there, but you have to be aware of the risks. That's a very interesting discussion, I think, on a society level. In Belgium, we have 65 kilometers. We're kind of managing it, but I think it's really something to think about. For the moment, the Belgian governments or the Flemish government said, we're going to hold the line, we're going to do all the protection seawards. But for what and at what costs? We don't know.
I think indeed, again, looking at that from a historical perspective, I mean, I fully agree. To what extent can we keep on protecting this? And the only reason we can is because the Belgian coastline is so limited. If we look back in time, indeed, you see basically two main strategies of how people have lived in this coastal landscape in the past. One is to have the more natural tidal environment that indeed floods, but it doesn't flood to such an extent that it is preventing people from living there. Even in the past, people were still living just on the salt marshes and then at these higher dwelling mounds where in case of a storm or in case of spring tide, they could retreat with their animals. So it's more of a way of adapting to the water, living with the water. And then we see this is a strategy that was there for thousands of years. And then on the Belgian coast, about 1,000 years ago, we started veering towards the other strategy of really more the fight against the water, trying to keep the water out as much as we could to increase just the potential of doing agriculture in this area, to increase its economic potential. And in a sense, what we're doing now is indeed trying to focus more on these nature-based solutions, trying to reinstate dunes, but it's still coming from this idea of fighting against the water and holding the water back, which is a strategy that is scalable to a certain extent, but we're reaching the end of it, I would say. So indeed, we'll have to now start thinking about what other strategies that are more in tune with the water, and to what extent can we just give the water a bit more space? Because the area that is nowadays on the Belgian coastline, the highest lying area is the Zwin, is the area that's still flooded, just because the sea then always also brings sediment, of course, to the coastal plain so that it can increase in level together with sea level rise. Something to consider.
Yeah, there's just 2 points. So the first thing is, I think, for what's a coastal community? To the people of Barcelona, people of Cadiz, the people of Dublin, are those cities coastal communities? So I think that this kind of differentiation, we just want to be careful about it. One thing that struck me this morning with the opening address was, this is everybody's responsibility. It's a societal responsibility, from the citizen to the government, from the student to the businessman. And we want to be mindful, because we do a lot of differentiation where we say it's their fault, you know, and we're all in it together. Okay, that's just one observation. The second thing then is in relation to, you know, the coastal area. It's not homogeneous. It's not heterogeneous. You know, the coast of Ireland on the west coast has cliffs that are several hundred meters tall, and nobody lives there. And then on the east coast, you have very shallow waters, or a very shallow coastline that's soft and have large populations. So much more similar to, say, the southern North Sea. So we must think about then the toolkit of solutions. So historically, we would have used civil engineering solutions, or hard solutions, to hold back the sea, whatever that was, whether it was concrete or sand dunes, but we held the sea at bay. And I think now, when I look at the coastal adaptation strategy that Ireland has and other countries have, you know, it is very localized. So it is what works for you. What will work on the west coast of Italy won't be what works in the Netherlands, where you've got sediment budgets. But there's a spectrum of solutions. There's a toolkit from structured retreat, so giving water space, from nature-based solutions, native oyster reefs, salt marshes, mangroves, if you're lucky enough to live in a warm climate. But so these, and then hard engineering solutions, barrages. Outside my office, which is on a tidal river in the city of Cork, they're raising the quay walls because of climate change. So I look out the window every day and I see a climate adaptation strategy, a piece of work that's suitable for a city, because it's a very expensive place, it's very valuable to protect it. That's not going to be suitable for marginal farmland, for example. So again, this spectrum of solutions will be very important for us to consider as we go through this century and into the next century.
Have to. We have more questions. I think we have Torsten, Andrea, and then Gilles.
Thank you. Yeah, Torsten Kiefer from JPI Oceans. You're very positive, I find, when it comes to the coastal communities, how they react and how they accept the science, basically. From a session some years ago, I actually came away with a different impression, where it was explained that there's a lot of basically sea level denial, like climate change denial. There is this effect. I think one striking example was, to be frank, from Australia. So maybe this is a totally different world, but the point was made that at least at the local level, people don't want to hear about that, because there's all these expensive villas at the coastline, and if suddenly they would have to face this discussion that their houses are in peril, then their house prices drop, and so there's basically just not much interest of having the debate on the agenda. And even another example was from Bangladesh, where you think, oh my God, these people must be so worried and so on. Also hear that it's a non-issue. Don't stir it up and so on. Okay, question is to you: do you face or experience that element also? Now, in particular, Richard, if you are talking about housing and so on, is this in our culture not an issue? This sea level rise, coastal vulnerability denial.
I'm going to take the opportunity to add to that question, actually, because I have a little tail to that. I think I just read sometime earlier this year that in Belgium, the houses that have the biggest, that are insured for the most, are mostly built on river floodplains. So even the insurance industry is still insuring places that are building on floodplains in Belgium. So you have a very valid question. You know, I think some people do see the point, but I'm not 100% sure that everybody understands that this is going to be everybody's problem. So
There's my first director told me this. He said it's the very rich and the very poor that lives at such low elevations. So the very poor are without option. So they basically have to move if they flood. The very rich will take you to court because it's the state's duty to protect. And whether or not they agree or disagree with the science, there's an expectation because of the investment that the investment is secured by the government, by the state. I think it's to a large extent still that way. I know that's the case for South Africa. And recently I understood, and I don't want to give myself out as an expert in Germany, but it's the same kind of conversation. People have an expectation to be kept safe from the ocean. So there's not really an engagement with what is my duty to keep myself out of harm's way. So to a certain extent, it even doesn't matter if they believe in the sea level rise. All they believe in is that they're here and they want to stay here, and the government must secure my position here. And that is a fundamental shift that we need to make. And if you, in the case of Germany, if you look back in time, the communities never used to be that settled. They were always willing to move because the sea was dynamic. But now we've painted ourselves a little bit into a corner. So I don't think we are really addressing that issue of retreat. We're not serious about retreat yet, but that is inevitable.
Richard, I feel like you mentioned Dublin or Cork just now, so it's probably the same question.
Well, yes. So, I mean, do people behave like ostriches around this with their head in the sand? I would say no. And strangely, people's realization that it's a real issue is happening because of their personal experience of recent natural events. So the increase in the storminess, so the winter storms on the Atlantic. So this is really, I mean, in Ireland, these are lived experiences for the whole of society in the last 5 or 6 years. So the return frequency of these extreme events is helping to move the social dial. Apart from things like, people can't get flooding insurance on their properties because of, living in a floodplain or things like that. So, the river system and the settlement pattern on the floodplains is also helping them realize that, okay? So I think, no, they are awake to it. They are looking for change. They're looking for leadership from government, for example. So we had an experience in the winter just past where there was a storm came in the last week in January, and it transpired that, maybe a quarter of the population was without electricity. So it highlighted a lack of resilience in the infrastructure systems of the country. And it was just things like there were no standby generators for water pumps for treatment. So suddenly there's a national resilience strategy just coming out of nowhere. So, when you're in the policy-making world, you never waste a crisis. So it's a terrible thing, but, you have to, with these big systemic, global issues, you do have this time cycle issue where political systems are 5 years at best. Economic systems are 10 years, you hope. Climate systems can be anything from decades to millennia. And you're trying to influence some sort of set of social changes, but within all these swirling cogs of different systems. So you need to take your opportunity and find a point of intervention and then make the right intervention so it sticks, so people buy into it, and then you move forward. But often when we look at it from a scientific point of view or from a research point of view, we arrive at a really radical solution because we've studied the whole problem, and that can be quite difficult for people to consume. So when David's presentation this morning on IPBES, he made a very good point, which is we now recognize why things are going wrong, but finding the way to make the change. We're still in the foothills of that journey. But I think we are getting there. We're having the right conversations. But again, you have this pressure to go fast. But, I would say, as Caesar said, festina lente. Make haste, but slowly.
Just an example, indeed, about the change and the difference in response in reaction. I can only make the If I compare it to the Dutch coasts, the Dutch are quite, when they're talking about climate change or protection of the coast, they're going forward very fast, very hard. And in Belgium, we look at it and say, how does it come? And then we start thinking about one of the biggest drivers for that was the storm, the crisis, 1953. In the Netherlands, some of the rich farmers died, and the whole of the province of Zeeland was submerged. Kind of big impact. In Belgium, 8 people died. Who died? The people who live in the Soesol in Ostend. Who lives in the Soesol? The poor. So where you still see now, it's more than 70 years, and you still see now these effects. You know that the Dutch, they protect their coast for a storm with a return period of 10,000 years. In Belgium, we were long at the storm period of 1,000 years. So even after such a long period of time, you still see a reaction in policy.
Okay, I think we had Adrian had a question. I think it's on, yeah.
Yes, so I do most of my work in the Danube Delta, and I have to interact a lot with people from the local communities. And what I found there was a huge amount of traditional generational knowledge, which I find that sometimes is not considered enough, neither by the scientists nor by the policymakers. And I just wanted to know your opinion on this and your experience.
I can give you our reflections in Ireland, but it's not in relation to coastal zones, it's in relation to marine protected areas. So we know scientifically that these are things we need, these marine protected areas, but we know from how they've been delivered so far that the scientific process is fine, but there's no social buy-in, there's no ownership of them. And we've studied it, we commissioned a lot of people, again, much smarter than me to tell us why this was. And the reason is because we weren't taking account of those in the coastal area. It's their community, it's their identity, okay? They have a connection to the marine space, the transitional space, and people like fishers. So people with a set of traditional knowledge or local knowledge about what happens. It's been disregarded by processes to date. So in our design of an approach to reach 30% marine protected areas, which is about 150,000 square kilometers of protected sites for Ireland, we have realized that not only do we need to have a scientific case for what to protect and why to protect it, there needs to be a social, there needs to be non-scientific knowledge that also needs to be incorporated. And this is really important because as you go through the life cycle of something like protection or coastal zone management, it has to be owned by the people who feel the closest connection to it. If they don't feel that, the protection is valid or is meaningful to them, it will just be an imposition by a local administration or a central administration, and they will never take ownership. And ownership leads to stewardship, and stewardship leads to real change in how an issue is managed or delivered. So I think ultimately that sort of engagement is going to be very important, and not just at a European level or a local level, but at a global level as well. So we're going to have to, in this century, where people have access to all the knowledge they want in their pocket, we're going to need to change and flatten the hierarchy and maybe have blurry lines between science and non-science so that we get everybody to, to work together to solve the problem.
Yeah, thank you, Gilles Ricolet. I would ask a question about coastal communities and adaptation. In your presentation, I've seen that you use the prediction of the IPCC and the sea level rising for the next, for the near future or not near future. But I would like to come back to some other problems that we are facing, especially in the forecast. With Richard has mentioned it, is especially for extreme events and how we are prepared to extreme events. And as we are talking about the Ocean Pact, I would like to know how your communities, coastal communities, can probably lobby this Ocean Pact for a more important European observation systems, and especially in situ observation. Because if we want to know what extreme events are coming, we need this observation. Today, 50%, 57% of the observation of the ocean by Argo are managed by the United States of America. We are talking a lot about making Europe with a big defense because we discovered that US will probably leave Europe in a certain amount. But it seems it's exactly the same when we looked about understanding the climate change. You know, drill, baby, drill is not really in favor of a climate change. So I wonder how your coastal communities, we will face probably important extreme events, big storms, as Richard has mentioned, can really push forward Europe to develop or maintain more ocean observation, because if you want to understand marine heat waves that change, it's really important. Because today, if you look to the forecast, there is a lot of problem in the models, because the models were used of a slow change and a steady state from centuries. And now the change is going so fast and we don't have the observation. And I would recommend the European Marine Board science brief on ocean observation. I don't know if you have it on the shelf, but I think this is an important document that you can look at. So my question is, are your coastal community aware of that, and how can they lobby to force having more ocean observation?
Maybe because this is going to be a wrap up. So I think it's a really good question, Jill, and I think it's something, so if you can all think about really what is it that you think the coastal communities really need to know to understand the impact that climate change is going to have on them. I agree with Jill that actually, if we don't have the ocean observations, we're not going to know the big storms coming in. We're not going to know the kind of, heat waves, there we go, that's the word, the heat waves coming in. So other than that, which I believe is important, and if you disagree, that would be good to know, but also, do you think there's something else that coastal communities or maybe citizens in general, it's just not mean it's coastal communities, that they need to know or that they need to understand to understand the problem?
I can give it a go. Speaking purely from the experience with a Latvian municipality and some Danish municipalities, some German municipalities, the communities themselves. So now we're talking about the municipality, small businesses, NGOs. They simply don't have the ability to think about observations and what they need. They don't know what they need. They want to be able to be safe, do their business, enjoy their environment, and basically be able to have good lives, if I can call it that, or say that simply. But they do ultimately need to understand how to plan for particularly extreme events, because they are affected already by extreme events. Just in the last 12 months, the same municipality that we've been working in were affected by a major sea storm, and they lost an enormous amount of infrastructure. So they are increasingly aware that there are things they don't need, that they don't know and they should know. Do they have the capacity and the resources to gain access to that information directly? Unlikely. So there's still lots of opportunity and space to bring that information to municipalities in a way that they can, municipalities and communities that can actually act on it, that they can use it. So when it comes to lobbying, I think, at least from the experiences that we have, is that they were unlikely to do that. But there's someone should be in between, someone that supplies information and knowledge to the municipalities that should be doing that on behalf of the municipalities or the communities. That would be my perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking about a science society policy triangle. And I think your answer is somewhere in the triangle, because indeed the science, you need the science to influence the policy, and you need the policy needs to react towards the society. So for me, it's somewhere, the answer is somewhere in that triangle. Indeed, like you were saying, there's local communities, they want to know, is it going to be a day with a heat wave? Is there going to be a storm? How can we prepare for that? And they need, in Belgium, it's often the weatherman. They need a good weatherman who speaks their language and who can translate what's happening within these observations and saying, oh, take care of your stuff and your belonging, because something is going to happen and it's going to be there within so much hours. So I think your answer needs to be there. It's going to be on a governmental layer. It's going to be on policy, where you need to lobby for good science so that they can protect their society.
Again, of course, looking at this from a different perspective, I think even communities that haven't really been faced with the impact of major storms themselves, again, we can use historical narratives to make that kind of clear for them of what's happened in the past, and create that link with ancestry and saying you're still living in the same conditions, and let's see and look how people kind of prepared, for example, for storms in the past, and again make that very, very palpable by going out in the landscape and showing how people in the past have dealt with these issues, and how we can again maybe take inspiration from that nowadays.
Yeah, okay. I'll make it as brief as I can. I believe there's a reception afterwards, and okay, yeah. When you say reception, I hear wine, so I hope we're on the same page on that. So I think there's a couple of things here. One, marine observations are very expensive, so we will have to continue what we're doing because the time series are very important. We will have to use new technology, so new technological platforms. We see things like Copernicus are a good example of that, but there are other automated platforms that are just emerging. So drones are, things that we can use that will actually give us a much richer amount of information around what's happening in the marine as it affects the coast. And you can do the same in catchments, okay? So that's the second thing. The third thing, I think, is something that we always have to struggle with, which is the use of citizens for science. Now, citizen science sounds very good, but when we talk to citizens who want to get involved in science, our interpretation of it is that it's a very low-level thing, it's raining or it's not raining. But for them, it's almost like they're going to diagnose the problem and give us the only solution that works. So we must really think about how we can engage active citizens in what is a meaningful amount of citizen science. So what technology can we give them? So what can they do that's meaningful so they have a sense of ownership and stewardship of their locality? And the very last thing I would say is, how do you bring all of those together? So how do you bring all those different things together so that you have, for example, really targeted flood prediction forecasting? So something like a meteorological service with catchment management or with coastal observations that can say, your town is at risk, so you need to take action. Because if people keep getting red alerts and nothing happens in their community, they start to lose faith in a forecasting model. So we need to then use all that technology so it's really targeted, so we can say, you're the one who now must kind of take action and stay at home today, or work from home, so there's no storm effect on you. I think that's the last thing I would say. But again, as I said at the start, it's everybody together, working together will generally get us there.
Thank you. All right. So that's it for the panel. You guys can go and sit down again. Thank you very much. That was very informative, and I think we had a very good discussion there. I think it's now the only thing that we have left. Actually, Richard, you are not in fact between us and the wine. It's Fiona's job to be between us and the wine, and she's worked very hard to kind of summarize everything, so she's going to give us a summary. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you so much to everybody. So we've arrived at the end of this event, and we're really grateful to all of the speakers, panelists, to you in the room, and of course those online who've engaged in these discussions. So we started out this morning with the discussion on the Ocean Pact and how it can be linked to the competitiveness of the blue economy, that we should be proud of that, proud of our blue innovators, and we should support them. And there was also an invitation to bring forward our views and ideas to put in place a meaningful and impactful ocean pact. So two speakers set the scene for the session ahead. We had David, the chair of IPBES, set out how they connect the nexus and transformative change assessments. And he really described how continuation of current trends in direct and indirect drivers will result in substantial negative outcomes for biodiversity, water, food, health, and will exacerbate climate change. But he did emphasise that positive outcomes are possible. Cassandra called for new governance mechanisms to enhance policy coordination and to reinforce links between MSP and integrated coastal zone management, and to establish this policy science society triangle. Our first session then was on pollution, crossing the land sea interface. Sasha demonstrated how anthropogenic emissions of trace metals like mercury can be affected by ocean acidification and or warming. Epithemius talked about eliminating waste, controlling pollution at source, and reusing water was key, and his talk was summarised by prevent, monitor, adapt, eliminate, and to conduct research. Detlef advised that the Water Framework Directive was good but costly, and that we need to address emerging issues. Adriana talked about the Danubius research infrastructure and some case studies with substantial impacts on the Black Sea. And from the floor, we heard a call to engage with the EMODnet to expand services in the land sea interface, and also how the circular economy principles should distribute responsibility across the value chain and not just reside with consumers. This afternoon then, we had our session just now on coastal adaptation and livability on the land sea interface. Louis, I think, was our Yoda today, sharing his universal wisdom for adaptation and how sectors interact with coastal communities, that we need to accelerate our actions to ensure our responses exceed the downward trends. We need social innovation for innovative coastal adaptation solutions. There's a lot of material out there, but when it comes to coastal adaptation, it's increasingly important to engage with people and to include the softer side of humanity. Our second speaker, Han-Laura, spoke about working with local communities, and I really liked the way how she talked about the community is informed by the way that the sea moves. She described co-design elements with the local community to build acceptance for nature-based solutions, and how to share best practices. Sukan joined the panel as a landscape architect, describing her interdisciplinary project, bringing together archaeologists, marine scientists, coastal engineers, and gaming visualization. And Richard outlined how Ireland deals with a number of different policies, and how the Ocean Pact is a good opportunity to take stock of our policies over the next 5 years, but that binding environmental targets at the right scale are needed, and threshold values need to be understandable, that we need a level playing field. So from the discussions then, we heard that awareness raising is possible by bringing stories, and choices from the past can make more sense to people than just focusing on statistics. Sustainable tourism can bring positive imprint and pathway to tomorrow to leave places better through regenerative tourism. And that we can change attitudes and value systems through education before regulation, and that this is happening for different ages. Again, I quite liked that. The focus moved on the input of artistic elements and storytelling, and how this can influence policymakers. That we're reaching the end of holding water back, that we need new strategies, and to give the sea more space. So I think we rounded out the discussion then, linking back to our opening speaker on in situ observations for extreme events, and how coastal communities can lobby for this through the Ocean Pact. And we need something like the Science Policy Society Triangle as an interlocutor for coastal communities. and that new technological platforms might be something. And I think we need a DTO for the Land Sea interface. Most of all, that everybody works together. So that's it. Again, I just want to really thank our speakers and panelists, and particularly to the Institute of Natural Scientists for co-hosting this event, and for staff, all the staff today who assisted us. Thanks so much to the EMB Secretariat, who are, as always, amazing, especially Paula, who I think has taken on a lot this week and next week, but who also always does a fabulous job, as do all of the Secretariat who are here. Thank you to the Ocean Decade and the Mission Ocean teams for endorsing this event. Thank you to all our attendees, both here and online. The event videos will be shortly available on the EMB's YouTube channel. Proceedings will be published later in 2025. Please do pick up the EMB document copies that are available, mostly so that the staff don't have to carry them home again. Have a safe trip home. And for all of you in the room, you're invited now to join us for this drinks reception. And thank you once again.